Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Corissa Saint Laurent, Corissa Saint Laurent. How do you say it
I don't say it quite
as
not quite as exotically. It's Saint Laurent.
yeah.
And whenever I do try to pronounce it with a fancy French accent, and I'm in a French-speaking country, no one understands me. So yeah, we just could say it the boring way.
Yeah. My sister lives in the French speaking part of Switzerland, and she's been there like 30 years, something like that, more than that. And people think that she's Canadian because she speaks with an English accent, but she speaks and they can't quite get it. She speaks French with an English accent, but that sounds Canadian because they're not used to anybody from England being able to speak French. Really.
It just throws their whole world off.
It throws the whole world off. I remember going into a restaurant with a friend of mine years ago in France, and the whole, as people heard our language, we're talking to one another in English, obviously, and the half of the restaurant turned heads to because we were English guys in a French restaurant. And then and stared at us, I think. And then when I managed to order, because I speak enough French to be able to order poulet or hamburger or whatever it is, they looked away. Then it was kind of okay. It was right. This guy speaks enough French. He's not. They call us roast beef. We call them frogs legs, right? Frogs. French frogs.
Yeah. They call you, I didn't know about the roast beef.
Yeah, that's what the English call the Brits. Yeah, because we have roast beef.
Yeah. How funny. Funny that it's all food related too. That somehow, is it an insult to be roast beef?
I don't know. We call the German krauts, and the Americans call the German krauts, and that's after sauerkraut, which is like pickled cabbage. It's not very nice, like cabbage.
I love sauerkraut.
You love sauerkraut?
Oh, I do. Yes. Yeah. I love pickled anything, pickled all sorts of things. And that might come from my Korean heritage, honestly, because, the kimchi and pickled fermented vegetables is a huge part of Korean cuisine. And I was, 3 when I left there. So I was eating that stuff. And so I think it's part of my heritage that I love pickled things.
So let's talk healing rather than gastronomy. What does healing mean to you, Corissa?
I've had a long time to contemplate this and have been in this space for both personally and professionally for so long that it's changed over time and evolved with me. And now in my 50-year-old place of understanding, or where I'm at currently in my progression, healing to me is a remembrance of who we really are. And I believe who we really are is a soul in a body here on a much bigger mission with a much greater purpose than the lifetime experience, the story of our human life that we've dropped into. And that healing is this journey back to the self, back to the true self, our true essence, and really back to remembering our whole and complete self, that we are whole and complete, that we are already healed. And so the difference being, and how I used to look at healing is, I'm broken. There are things to be healed. And I needed to do all of these things in order to heal that. And when I started to look at healing differently as a remembrance of just that I already am healed and whole, it was still work. I mean, it wasn't that, oh, okay, boom, I'm there, I've arrived, and there's no other struggle. But the work was different. The focus was different, and it was much more empowering, and I would say much more effective.
Yeah. Well, my soul is singing now, right? Because when I knew from our conversation last time, and listeners, there's a link in the show notes to the last conversation Carissa and I had. I kind of knew, well, not knew. I thought you'd say something a little bit like you've done, and it's for me. And the reason my soul sings, my spirit sings, is because I'm with you on this. So we could fanboy, fangirl each other, but that wouldn't really do much good for the listeners, right? So have the thing that comes to my mind is, have you read Nancy Verrier's book, The Primal Wound and the Follow-Up Wound?
I haven't read either. Okay. No, I mean, I'm familiar with the concept, but I haven't read the books.
Okay. So the second book, it echoes kind of what you said. So you said journey to self, I think, one of the things that you said. And yet the whole book is very psychological, when what you seem to me to be talking about isn't totally psychological. It seems to be more profound.
It's spiritual, really, you know, and psychological and psychology, which I'm fascinated with, and certainly spent a lifetime of fascination both in it, studying it, receiving it, as far as from a therapeutic standpoint. But it really, you know, psychology is the study of our psyche, our mind, and our mind is only one aspect of the self. And what I believe is the true self is, you know, it's the mind, it's the emotions, which essentially are, you know, our feelings and the emanations of our heart, the vibrations of our heart, and then the spirit, which is the ethereal body that carries us to and connects us to source. Because we're here in this body, I believe, as a wandering soul that's entered into this lifetime through this vessel to have this experience. But we are a spark of the divine. We are the divine. And that our spiritual nature connects us to that wholeness, to that oneness. And so what I'm talking about as far as remembrance of self is that divinity, really. It's not the self as we think of it, like the ego self. It is the true self, or what I call the true self, which is our higher self and higher mind, which is the spirit, connecting us to this greatness, this oneness, this wholeness that exists both because of us and outside of us. And that's something that I only know because I literally experienced it through an awakening moment where, unassisted and unguided, you know, I wasn't in a therapy session, I wasn't in a healing session, I wasn't on a psychedelic, I wasn't, you know, being guided and assisted in any way, but I had and met the oneness and had this profound experience of that immersion. And my remembrance comes from being invited into it. Like, really, like, here you go. This is who you are. This is what you're here to remember. But I still needed to go do the work to fully be in that. So that experience happened to me when I was 20. And it's taken me this many years, 30 years, to actually fully be in that. And I spent a lot of years doing, a lot of, well, I'll call it traditional healing. I don't think it looks traditional to a lot of people, but, let's just say, various healing modalities. I was a healer and did healing work for other people and have done almost everything under the sun. I mean, just so many different things that have been a part of the journey, but they were not the journey. The journey was this remembrance, was literally this, where I was just in that experience. And I think we all can get there. And yes, the tools help. And yes, the practices help. And the people that are guiding those practices are helpful in this. But when we give over our power to those practices, those healers, those guides, then we are not meeting the challenge of actually coming home. We are kind of watching our healing on a screen, is how I look at it. We're removed by a layer of not fully stepping in. And I feel like now I've like stepped into my life. I've stepped into the movie of my life. I am the one creating this. I'm behind the camera now. I'm in the picture. I'm looking. I can go in all of these different places. I can be outside of it, look in. I can be in it and look out. I can shoot the film. I can write the story. And that's a very different perspective than being, I am broken, I need to be healed, giving your power to a healer to heal you, and then expect this kind of miracle. I think that somewhat wasted some of my time doing that, spinning my wheels in that space. And that's honestly why I left the healing profession as well, because I saw that in my clients.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much there. I'm gonna kind of just simplify it with my own theory, just to give it to make sure that we're on the same line. So the way I see it is that the spirit is always whole, and what we are healing, or what is healing, is the psychology. So our psychological identity is the thing that's wounded in the primal wound, and the bit of us that's always whole is the spirit.
Mm. And I would say also the body can be broken too.
Okay.
And I believe the spirit can be broken. I believe, and this might just be a difference in our semantics around this, but I believe the soul is whole. The soul is complete.
Okay.
It is one and is part of that oneness. Our spirit can be broken, meaning our connection to source and ourselves as soul can be broken. We can forget that. We can not know that that's who we are. That connection can be very muddy or just untethered completely. So in that sense, it can be broken. Our body and mind, of course, can also be wounded or broken or need healing in that sense. So the remembrance of our soul as whole, as ourself as soul, allows us to have the energy and the power and also the guidance from source consciousness, which is all we really need to listen to.
Yeah.
When we have that connection, then we know what we need to do. Our answers come. And so much of healing is, oh, I don't know why, right? I don't know why I feel this way. I don't know why I'm hurting so much, or what is this mystery disease going on in my body? And like I said, these things exist. I mean, it's not that those things don't exist, right? Even psychosomatic illnesses are real. I mean, yeah, they might be caused by the mind, but there's still an actual manifestation in a physical condition that is real. So I'm not here to say, oh, none of that's real. That's all made up. It's well, it is kind of all made up, but it's, but it's real. It's so, I mean, we are making our reality. So we are making our reality in whatever way we've been taught. And if we can get back to the teachings of our soul and of source, then we can make our reality be totally healed. We are complete. We are not wounded. That can be our reality literally overnight without needing to go through years and years and years of struggle to what we think we need to do to in order to heal. And that's just my belief in that that our timelines don't need to be such that we can actually just decide. We can decide for our own, for what the reality that we're creating is to be whole and complete. And then our life fills in that. It gives us that. And it's just it is the time it takes to convince yourself of that is the time it takes to quote unquote heal. But it's not the healing practices per se. It isn't those healing modalities per se. Those are to me, I believe, really all just like a placebo. They have an effect that is real, but we could have that effect without that thing, or we could have that effect with many other things. It doesn't have to be that one thing.
Okay. So you're right. It is semantics. So you're describing our essence. Your term, I think, for our essence is soul, which is always whole, and you're using that. Yeah. So essence. You're using soul, the word soul, for our essence, and I'm using the word spirit for essence as well. And so we're both on the lines. You're just using, which it is in the semantics of it. So what you said towards the end of that answer would be, or it doesn't matter which road takes you there, all roads lead to Rome, right? So all roads lead to wholeness. Doesn't matter how we get there. It's about when we have the experience. You sounded to me like you were talking about an experience when you were 20, and then making an understand, and then so an experience at 20, and then an understanding, a 30-year exploration of the implications of that experience, and aligning, and 30 years of understanding the experience, and aligning your life to the experience that you had. That's what it sounded like to me. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And the experience is what we all are, I believe, here for, is to be one with source, God, if you want to call it that, the universe, and that we are that divinity. We are the divine. So that is the remembrance part, which is the journey back to self and wholeness and oneness. And the reason why it didn't stick for me, and it took 30 years, is because I was getting in my own way, meaning my ego, my human self got in my own way of just having that. I had that purely without, like I said, any assistance, just experienced that. It was a complete download of and experience of the oneness. And yet I rejected it, me, meaning my ego, rejected that as either that's not for me right now, I am not worthy of this, and had so many stories in place that I had to fight through in order to get back to this place. And so the stories were, yes, of worthiness, but also were around struggle, like that. Oh, I need to struggle at and work hard at this. So I think the worthiness came from, or my lack of worthiness came from having been, abandoned and put up for adoption. And then my struggle story came from my parents, my adoptive parents, who that's their paradigm. It is life's not easy, kid, this kind of mentality, and you work hard and you struggle toward achievement and struggle toward happiness. And I think that's fairly common in the Western world. And so I'm dealing with, those two strong paradigms and fighting through that in order to get back to this place that is just here, right here within, right here. It is me, but I had to remove so many layers that weren't me, that were all the stories laid upon me over this lifetime. And that's really what the healing has been, is just the removal of stories and programs and conditioning to get back to the purity, to get back to that essence.
Yeah. So the thing that helps us heal then is the uncluttering, seeing through the conditioning, seeing through the stories.
Absolutely. Understanding that our stories aren't who we are, and that our stories don't make us who we are. And some people like to really attach themselves to stories as the martyr, right? I've been through this. I've been through so much struggle, and look at what I've, come through. And even if they are quote unquote successful now, they might still be clinging to that story of their struggles, so that's holding them back in other areas potentially. And so anyway, our stories are powerful teachers in our life. But if we don't take the teaching and then and integrate that into our life and cling just to the story, we are suffering our suffering. Not all stories are suffering, obviously. We have beautiful stories and celebratory things and lots of things, beautiful things that happen to us as well. But clinging to that as who we are is equal to clinging to the struggling types of stories, I believe, because those aren't who we are. Those are just things that happen to this human self. And so really, truly, I mean, yes, we can look at those stories and take lessons, take gifts. And that's what I heard in that awakening at 20, was to heal my heart, find my gifts, and then share them with the world. So the healing of my heart was what I believe has taken the longest. My gifts I have found along the way and still continue to find, and none of this is over, right? This is all ongoing. But the gifts part is the taking what is left from the examination of the story and seeing, okay, that's not me. That's something that happened for me. What gift lies here for me to take and integrate and allow to shine through me now. And so that without that piece of the healing, and if it's just like, oh, heal my heart and feel good again, like feel okay, feel not suicidal, like, yeah, get there first. But then what gifts came from that? And if you don't take the gifts, and what you're taking is the opposite, which is resentment and anger and fear still of a situation that's no longer in front of you. And, and all of those things that can still control you, even when they're not your current circumstance. And our current circumstance is even not our current circumstance. Our current circumstance is what we're making of it right now. And that now is always changing. The now is moving. So what do we want it to be now? What about now? What do I want it to be right now? Right. And we are always constantly moving into that new place. So even if I had a moment where I felt like, oh, I feel really embarrassed right now because some shameful feeling is coming up. That's that moment that I can literally shift into a new moment now to be like, oh, like let go and relax into and let go of that shame. It doesn't happen overnight to get into this kind of process, right? None of this is necessarily, oh, you snap your fingers and you have it, but you can eventually get to that place where you can through literally believing in it. It's belief work that is so deep that it becomes your new operating system. So that's the going back to like, what is healing? I mean, it literally it's remembrance, yes, but it also is like through the remembrance, understanding that we have a different operating system. It is not the human operating system that maybe we were conditioned with. It is the soul operating system that exists outside of all of that crap that happened to us and all of the conditioning that was put upon us.
So playing devil's advocate then, we're often told in the adoptee land where everybody's encouraged to share their story, and you're saying we're not our story. So how do these two things to me there's a clash there, but maybe you see it different. I don't know. How do we?
I think it's important to understand our stories, to understand them in the journey of understanding ourselves. But we then let them go. So we have to, or get to look at them so that we can let them go.
Okay.
If we're only looking at them and then sinking further and deeper into them and identifying with them, and that story becomes who we are, we get lost in ego. We get completely consumed in ego. But if we can look at them and let them go, then we are freed up to fully accept ourselves as our soul self, and that we're here and these things happened for us so that we can learn great lessons and learn beautiful things to take with us and to enhance even our current life. Hopefully, right? Hopefully it's not like deathbed realization. But people do have that where they're like, oh, I didn't realize this until now that I'm, and then that's a beautiful thing too. But if we can realize all of this before we get there and actually live a better now life for it, that's what I'm here for. That's what I want for me. And that's what I want for others too. And it's completely possible. So the stories are important to examine but just to not over-identify with.
So it seems like you're doing two things. You're separating who we are from the story that we've been through, and you're also you're disidentifying from the story. So we're sharing our story, and then we're separating from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
and even in the sharing of our stories, we can be still removed from it. If you've healed the wounds of the story and essentially let go of it, we can share it in, oh, this is something that happened in this lifetime that shaped me in this way. And as you always brilliantly put it on your podcast, what insights did you gain from that? Right? It's that's the gifts, that's the gold, that's the what we can take with us from that story. But yeah, I think that, if we stay within that story, which, our stories shape our personality, our characteristics, it's everything from, how we communicate with people, if we are an introvert, an extrovert, if we are an intellectual versus someone who's like very emotional. Like, I mean, the stories deeply shape us and in our projection in the world. But if we remember that we're not that projection, we are the projector and the projectionist, then we can share and examine our stories as looking at that projection, looking at that movie and going, wow, look at that story. How can I rewrite this scene in order for it to serve me better in this lifetime? In order for me to, what can I learn from this scene? You may be like me where you've watched a movie a couple of times, and maybe the second or third time you see different things. You're like, oh, I never noticed that character, or I didn't even remember this scene, or you just notice new facets, underlying currents of the plot and the story of what the director or screenwriter might have been talking about. That's happened to me so many times in watching movies that I love. Again, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. This element that I didn't see before. And this is true of our life as well, that we can look at our life through the same way, but also removed in the same way as we would a movie, to look at those scenes and see different things, but also for those scenes to not have the emotional control that they may have had in the past over us. And all of that, like I said, comes through, for me, it's come through an acceptance of myself as this soul, as this thing that is so not that story, and so not that, even that person who experienced that wounding. I'm not that person. I am residing in that person. Maybe the best way to say it. Sounds a little creepy to, those who may not believe in soul. And, I truly believe that even if you don't believe in soul, even if you don't believe that we are anything more than this flesh and blood, I believe that seeing ourselves outside of these things that happen to us is not only can be done, but is still beneficial to who we are. We can still remove ourselves from those scenes and go, oh yeah, you know what? The parents that did that to me weren't doing it to me. They were just playing out their own story. They were wounding themselves. They were not trying to hurt me. This isn't personal. This is something that happened because of their wounds, right? Hurt people. So we can even do this, removal, if you will, or stepping outside of ourselves and looking at the frames of the stories of our life, and have that experience of separation from the one that was wounded from who we really are, even if you don't believe in soul.
Yeah. So you've said, well, first thing is, have you ever talking about movies, have you ever seen Airplane? Seen the movie Airplane?
Yeah.
Well, apparently it took, the reason that that is so chock full of jokes, and that you see more and more jokes the more times you watch it, is because it took them years to get the money funded. Sorry, get the film funded. They saw the green light. They're waiting for the green light from the Hollywood. That somebody traded the script and they're trying to sell it to a studio, right? So it took them years and years to sell the idea. So whilst they were waiting to get the green light from one of the studios, they kept on writing more jokes into it, and that's why there's so much going on in the thing, because it's years of extra joke adding in, right? And so I love your metaphor for looking back at our life and seeing things differently. So I think you said things happened. I'm quite pleased with myself because I must have been listening. I'm trying to listen more to the guest. You said things happened for us. You said that happened. You mentioned that about 2 or 3 times. You mentioned happened for us rather than happening to us, right? So I think this was a distinction that we had on the podcast. I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, something like that. That this stuff didn't happen to us; it happened for us. So looking back on our life, if we see that this event happened for us, that was to our benefit, right? It's to our benefit rather than it happened to us, which it means it happens to our detriment. This is that was a distinction that I heard listening to you. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really, being either in a state of being where you're the victim or you're the victor. You're disempowered or you are the empowered oneness, and anywhere in between, right? But we have the ability to control our own minds through our speech, and our thoughts come through actual words that we say both out loud and in our minds to ourselves. And it's important to be conscious of those words that we speak, because if we're speaking it out here, we are absolutely speaking it in our mind, in our heads to ourselves. So the more that we can switch it out here when we hear it, I hear myself saying this to you, and I can go, oh yeah, let me change that, because I'm also changing it to how I say it internally to myself. And also vice versa. As you change your inner talk, that will also impact and change your outer talk as well. I mean, it certainly goes both ways. And it's really important to do that, because these words have power, and they are they hold not only personal significance to you, but they hold cultural significance and familial significance. So how we speak to both ourselves and to the world will also guide how we think and feel and act, and ultimately how we are.
So I'm going to say something pretty controversial.
Okay.
But I know, because of where it won't be controversial to you, I don't think, bearing in mind, you started off by, when we were talking about gastronomy, you were talking about being Korean. Does soul have a color? Does soul have a ethnicity?
Oh, that kind of color. Okay. No, not from my understanding. It's, our ethnicity and our races here, are very much tied to the physical plane. They are product of these physical locations where, the melanin in your skin and the kinds of, foods, going back to food that, your ancestors ate and how we look, color of our hair, all of these things are tied to, you know, where we lived geographically, really, here on the planet, which is very physical. But, you know, there's some people who believe in the, you know, where our souls came from can show up through our physicality, and that sometimes people see that in humans, that, oh, okay, you came from the star system, I can see that in your physicality. And yeah, I don't know if I believe that as much, but I certainly, our physical traits here, I believe, are very physical, and then our soul is eternal.
So could you sum up in a couple of sentences what you think helps us heal then? Because we've been talking quite a while, and I'm thinking, what we've talked about healing as an experience. We've talked about healing as an understanding. We've talked about healing as a remembrance of who we are. We've separated psychological healing, or we've differentiated between a soul that is always whole and a physical identity that is healing and continually healing. I think from what you said, it will continue to heal for the nature of life. So
what, I mean, I honestly think that first step is remembering our wholeness. So again, if you don't want to go there mentally to say we're a soul in a body, and you don't believe in that, then I would say at least the first step is to believe in our wholeness, believe in our completeness, that we came here that way. Yeah. And we all did. I mean, we all came through in this way. Now, some people came through with physical limitations that they've had struggles with. Certainly, that's very real. But whatever we've come into this lifetime with, we have the ability to work with, right? We have the ability to understand that, well, this is our version of wholeness. This is our version of completeness. And no matter what, the physical, maybe mental, those things are not who we really are. The soul that carries all of the information from all of our lifetimes and from everywhere can be felt in the heart. That feeling. And so no matter what struggles that we might have come in with, even from birth forward, we all have the ability to feel the wholeness of our heart and to be the wholeness of our heart, which we can call love. Love, of course, has a lot of different connotations. It's you know, romantic love, and you know, storybook love, and love between partners, which is often where it's relegated to. But love is so much bigger than that in this definition. It's a vibration. It's a frequency of complete openness and surrender to all that is. Some may call that God. Some may call that, you know, source consciousness, universe, connection to all things, everything energetically that we connect to from this place and this space. And we all have the ability to do that. So recognizing that, and then figuring out how to reconnect to that frequency, how to bring that frequency back into your life. Like we talked about earlier, there are so many ways and paths and teachers and modalities and practices in order to heal the heart. But what I found over all these years is that it's just, again, remembering that it's whole. that it doesn't need healing, that it is healed. It is whole. And just remembering that is this very first big step. Now, the other practical things, because I know a lot of people are going to go, okay, Corissa, like we need some real practical things to go and do, because I won't feel like I'm doing anything unless I'm doing something. And I get that, because I am and certainly have been in that paradigm for many years as well. So the doing things that you can do besides the being things of just being love are to remove the things that are not loving in your life. So for me, that was alcohol. It was self-talk. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, it was negative self-talk or demeaning self-talk. Just talking to myself and in a way that was not empowering to my life. It was removing certain people from my life and saying I can't have a relationship with them in this lifetime anymore. I mean, the only way I can be in a state of love with that person is to not have them in my life, physically present. So go through and examine, what those things might be for you that are not loving. And then what are those things that are loving? Replace them with loving gestures, loving acts, loving thoughts and feelings and behaviors and actions. Those things go far beyond what we consider as self-love. Self-love gets a bad rap because I think people think it's selfish. Like, oh, you're just going to sit around loving yourself. Isn't that just selfish? What I'm talking about is getting into the frequency of love, and doing loving things puts us in that frequency so that we are emanating with the frequency of source. We are totally in line and vibing with source when we are in that frequency. So whatever we can do to be in that frequency of love, and that could be then surrounding yourself with people who love you unconditionally and support you unconditionally. It could be being in nature, taking time to just be with yourself, just be. And I know that doesn't feel like doing anything, but it is hard for a lot of people to just be with themselves. And so whatever you need to do to get to that place where you can just be with yourself, do that thing. And that could be removing a lot of distractions. So I know I'm going back to removing because we have to do so much removing distractions, removing of things that are not your own experience of self. That could be, and I know we were talking about this earlier with you, is like removing books and content, because that can be influencing your experience of self. Yeah. Right. And whether positive or negative. So all of these things are attainable and easy. You don't need anybody to do this for you or do it even with you. I mean, you might want somebody to do it with you because it's nice to have, friends along the path and the journey. But removing things from your life and then adding things that are loving are all within our capability, everyone's capability. What makes it difficult? Now, I'll talk one moment about removing something that was really hard for me, which was a relationship with my adoptive mom. It is not easy to cut ties with someone in your life, let alone a parent, right? I mean, this isn't something that, sociopaths can do that pretty easily, I guess, right? But it's not easy for a child to do that. So it wasn't an easy thing for me, but it was absolutely the right thing. And in doing it, it was a very loving thing for me. So what I needed to do in order to be in this state of complete surrender to this and complete acceptance of this is, yes, this is like no question the right thing for me, was to get out of my own way, because I was holding on to my story. I was holding on to the pain of my story and repeating that painful pattern by being in a relationship with her. I was holding on to hope. Hope is a killer. Hope is not something that we should befriend, because it actually can hold us back and keep us from actually living the true life that we want to live. So I was hoping she would change. I was hoping that my relationship with her would get better. I was hoping for all these things that were not going to happen. And so holding on to all of these things with regard to her was really the only thing that kept me from doing the thing, which was letting go. And so we can look at that, and in all areas of our life, whatever it is that we need to potentially let go of and remove because it's not loving, we need to step out of our own way and essentially say, well, what of, and this is where obviously the examination of the stories come into play, because we can look at our stories and see how they shaped us into the personality and the traits that we have that then are holding us back from our true self. So it's all this, removal of these costumes and veils, if you will, as you go. But yeah, I think that the things we do, whatever they are, should be fed through that filter of love. Is this loving? Is this putting me in the frequency of love? If it's a yes, bring more of it in. Hold on to those things. Nurture those things. If it's a no, then it's do everything to let go of that. And whatever the thing, the doing is, doesn't really matter. It's just, using that filter to get to the place where we are emanating and vibrating in that love, so much so that we forget our stories, that we can be within this and in this embrace of source and fully just living in that, from that place of where honestly there's no more suffering. We get to suffering and we return to suffering through potentially another human experience, another something that happens, but we can return to this place too through that, again, remembrance of soul and our connection to source by being in that frequency of love. So it sounds like a simple formula. It's just what is your personal formula? We all have our own personal formula, which is why I don't believe that healing as a profession or healers as a profession are necessarily going to do us as individuals any good. They can be guideposts, they can be guides along the way, but we don't want to get too stuck on one thing, because we're using those and creating, this our own path through that, through each of those things that we find along the way. And each of those things that we find along the way are perfect in that moment, but may not be something that's going to work for us the next day or the next year. And we've got to let them go. And we've got to move on and see what else exists and open ourselves up to that. So it's a simple formula, let's say, but choosing what fits in and plugs into that formula for yourself individually is the harder part, because we're so conditioned to look out here. look externally to ourselves. And the moment you get quiet and you go in and you start to trust and you get into that vibration of love, is the moment you find those answers. And those answers are right there. They are not out there. They're not coming from some guru or some book. You might have been reminded from something that you see and read and hear, but the full and true experience of it comes from within.
So my next question is around what hinders our healing. So from listening to what you've said so far, I would say it's things like a belief that we're wounded. It would be things like looking outside ourselves when the answer is within. And it would be identification with our story, and also it would be our ego. Those would seem to be the kind of the top things. Belief we're wounded, looking outside ourselves. So identification with that story and our ego. That's what I think, from what you've said, hinders our healing. What other things? What flesh could you put on those bones? What other things do you think get in our way?
I think anything else is going to be some subset of that. Because you nailed it as far as the biggies, the things that are the big categories, our ego being, at the helm of all of that. And our ego self is trying to protect us, at all costs. And it will then do those other things in order to protect if we were, surrounded by danger and surrounded by trauma and surrounded by awful things. So of course the ego is going to protect us and then go into this mode of continual protection if we don't essentially separate from our ego or get smarter than our ego. It's not that our ego no longer exists. It's just that our soul self becomes in charge, not the ego self. And our ego self can, be there as someone who does our bidding versus the one who gives the orders.
So you mentioned trauma then. So, and I thought, yes, why didn't I ask that question before? So, how does that fit in? How does trauma fit in with healing? How does trauma hinder our healing?
This is it is the thing we are healing from, right? So absolutely, it feels like the hindrance, but it's the wound, and then we are doing the healing work to address that trauma. But I look at trauma just like I look at stress, that it isn't something in and of itself. It's really our response to it that matters. So yes, it existed. It happened, right? Something happened that was traumatic. Something happened that was stressful or potentially the cause of stress. But it's our response to the incident that matters. So what our job then is to work on our responses. How are we going to respond to that stressful situation, to that traumatic incident? Trauma is interesting because it ends up hiding in our body. We don't even know sometimes that we have a trauma response until a trigger happens in our life, in our world. And then all of a sudden we're freaking out, or we're having a panic attack, or we are yelling, uncontrollably at somebody, or, whatever it might be. So the incident, the pain of that incident can go and hide out in the body. And then our mind protects us, our ego protects us from experiencing it by trapping it in our body. And our body does the bidding of our mind and goes, okay, yes, sir, I will hold this thing deep, deep down, and no one's going to get at it unless you want it to be gotten at. Okay, yes, sir. And it will push it into wherever place that it's going to be pushed. And often that's in an energetic center of our body that aligns to whatever that trauma was. So the trauma, yeah, go ahead.
Can I take another go at that?
Yes.
Just so you were talking about emotional healing the heart. So if we were to see trauma as trauma is two things, I think. It's either the event, or it's the, as you said, it's the response to the event. And that response is usually a feeling. Yeah, it's a feeling, or it's a thought that's maybe it's something, it's some energy that's stored in our body, maybe. So we may be seeing our soul as whole as a one-off experience, like the one experience you had 20 years ago, and then healing our heart and healing our body for forever.
Yeah. I mean, it may be forever. It may not be, depending on, I mean, I believe that once we do, well, it really depends on how you look at the healing of the heart. For me, I don't see the heart, I used to, but I don't now see the heart as just part of our physical body. The heart is, to me, it's part, it is, I mean, we've got an organ that is our heart, but then when we talk of the heart is love. So it is our center of love. It is where we generate that energy and where we also receive that energy. So it is a energy center, our heart center, from a chakra standpoint, yes, resides in that area of the heart organ, but it is not the physical, and it's also not the emotional. It impacts the physical and the emotional, but it is energy that we generate and that we also gain from outside of ourselves. So in any system that, is energetic, whether it's, the Vedic systems that led to, the chakra system, or it's, Chinese medical system and all of the are looking at energy as chi, and right, these ancient systems, chi and prana, and as we explore energy and different layers of it, we are talking about both generating it ourselves, but that it is generated from external too. It's an interplay between our inner and outer experience of that energy. So we can bring that energy more into our body. If you do like a practice like Qigong, you can bring that energy from source into your body and energize your meridians and your cells and your physical, emotional, mental bodies. But you are bringing that energy from outside of you. Well, I wouldn't say I don't even look at it as you're bringing it from outside of you. You are resonating both from within through a practice that you're doing so that you resonate with that energy external to you that is the same. So that's what I mean by the heart, that we get into a resonance, a frequency of the heart that is this frequency of love that then resonates with source consciousness to where we are in that oneness. So that is a bigger, I guess, a wider definition of what the heart is. It's not just emotions. And then
can I take another go at it? Can I take another go at it? So trauma veils our essence. Trauma hides our soul, but it doesn't affect our soul. Is that closer? I'm trying to think. I'm trying to put these things together. We've got trauma and soul, right?
Yeah.
Soul, essence of who we are. What's the relationship? What's trauma got to do with this?
No, trauma is absolutely something that we experience here on the physical plane. Yes. And it has nothing to, well, it has to do with our soul, I believe, in that this is what we are sent here for, to have this particular set of lessons in order to learn something about life, about all of life.
So trauma, trauma happens for us to help point us to our soul.
Absolutely. Yeah, to point us to not only our soul, but also to connect us more deeply to humanity. If we never know what it feels like to be in the shoes of this person or that person, then we don't know what that human experience is. And so I believe that we come here repeatedly to this earth school to have all of these different lessons and to have every different type of human experience so that our soul can experience that and learn and evolve. So this is a place of evolvement or evolution of the soul through these human experiences. The soul is whole, but it is still expanding and evolving. So we come here, we get to have these human experiences, and we get to learn from them or not. You don't have to go into these lessons and learn. But I believe that our life is better for it if we do. And not even just, like I said, your next lifetime, but this one. This is the one that I care about the most, because I believe this, this is where consciousness is right now. This is where my consciousness is. This is where your consciousness is. So let's affect this one in the best way possible. So the trauma that we experience is something just like, let's say, the parents that you got or the lot in life that you got. Those are all the things that we came here to experience. And it is how we choose to respond and react to that matters. And so it's, did we learn something from it? Are we a better person from this? Is this something that helps me connect more deeply to humanity? Is this something that is allowing me to expand this vibration, this frequency of love into the world? So that's how I look at trauma. I mean, it's how I look at all things, really, but trauma is obviously getting a lot of talk recently. And I think it's a good thing that people are examining it, just like any of their stories. But like we were talking about with story that if we over-identify with our trauma, if we get lost and sucked into our trauma as this is who I am and this is my experience. I mean, this is true if someone were to, all of a sudden they are their diagnosis, right? Oh, I am, a blank, whatever it might be, right? That is keeping you stuck within that story of your trauma. So trauma is just is just a thing that happened. And just like anything that happened, like you got straight A's, that's something that happened in your life. You had your parents got divorced, that's something that happened. Trauma is something that happened. It's how long we want to allow it to control us. And that's within our power to decide. Just like the identifying with our straight A studentness, right? We can choose to identify with that our whole life. And I believe that would also be debilitating to our soul's evolution as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. There's so much there. This is definitely one I'm going to have to listen back to myself. A final one is a curiosity from me. You said that we hear a lot about trauma. How come we don't hear much about spirit or soul in adoptee circles?
Well, I think it's one of those things that we don't hear a lot about in society in general, unless we're talking about it from one of the prescribed religious dogmas. Then it's okay to talk about spirit, soul, God. But when we're talking about it from this more mystical place of our own direct experience of God, rather than through a gatekeeper, we don't hear about that as much, or it's pushed out into the fringes of woo-woo, I believe, because it is what reminds us that we are here as sovereign beings, sovereign, powerful beings who don't need their meaning anybody who's putting it out there for us, their solutions. We don't need those things that are pushed to us as the solution for our pain and our problems, our trauma, our whatever it is that has happened, So I believe that has been a means to disempower us. And within adoptee circles, I think that's just, we're just a microcosm of that it's not talked about because, again, within adoptee circles, it's either you're dissociated from your story or you're totally immersed and over-identified with your story. And those two camps tend to be very welcomed here. At what I've found. But then
Can you say that again, Carissa? You said the two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, that in the adoption community that I've been involved in, right? That I've been part of. I think it's very welcomed for you to either be completely like dissociated from your adoption story. And then it's like, oh, come here, come, we want to connect you to other adoptees into, doing a birth search into, what is adoption? And here's an adoption consultant and an adoption therapist who can help you open up and et cetera. And so you as a dissociated being is welcomed, and then you very identified with you as an adoptee and your trauma of that and your story of that is also very welcomed in the adoption circle. The healed space, this space of we are thriving, as your podcast says and shares that we are healed, that we are whole, that we are better from this is not welcomed as much, I believe, because a lot of people are here processing within the adoption space, processing still, and that can sometimes feel offensive to them, like that you with your everything that, well, we'll go to the extreme of it, that this happened for you and that you're better from it, right? When people are really hurting and are really like in the throes of their trauma, can feel offensive. And I get that. I totally get that. I've talked to many, what I'll just kind of put in the camp of angry adoptee, who's still very much a victim of their trauma. And they're so hurt and angry and they're fighting, right? They're from that place and they're fighting hard for their solace, for their justice. And it's a place that is then met with, if you come at, it with this, well, that happened for you, dear. Yeah. It's not going, you're going to get a big fu, from that. And so I get that. I think, I've been an angry person, absolutely, but I wasn't, spending a lot of time in the adoptee circles then. So I've gone through my stages of anger and, writing in my journal so hard that I'm ripping the pages up as I write and, just spewing anger and dealing with that. I've been there for sure. I just wasn't, sharing that necessarily within those spaces, but I completely get it. And because it's kind of can sometimes feel like one space where, all are welcome. But then if you're offending someone with, this kind of idea that we are, that we came here for that, then I can see how it might hinder somebody's processing. I would hope that it would help someone's healing, but you can only help someone's healing until they're ready to be helped, until they're ready and wanting to be healed and wanting to remember that they already are. Until then, there is no help that our healing can provide. Which is why it's such an individual process and why it's such our own journey, our own personal, very, very personal journey that, I love helping people along and supporting them and guiding if I can, but not when someone certainly doesn't want to be, because there's no heroicism in that, and there's no getting through, really, until someone's ready themselves.
Wow, there's been so much there. As always, listeners, I'd urge you to check out the show notes for links to the guest. I mean, Carissa's laid down some really, really serious stuff here, and seriously powerful stuff. And I would also suggest having a look at the previous episode, link in notes to that, because we went to this space. Perhaps we were a little bit broader. We were talking about empowering, inspiring, and healing. Today, we've been focused purely on the healing thing. So if you're looking for a more holistic take on this, then definitely check out the last episode. And thank you, Carissa. Amazing stuff.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me on again.
Thanks a lot, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.